I'll be putting up scenarios and I'll then be asking people, well, could it work here? Or do we all think this is madness or whatever? So off we go. Unfortunately, I have to do a couple of promotional things because that allows me to do the time and produce the slides. So having done what I am obliged to do, right, so there's two themes, but it doesn't matter if we don't get onto the second one. So first of all is their world is not our world, and its example of either modern or current US practice, tables for debate and comparison as to whether the approach could work or even be acceptable in the UK in respect of operations, accessibility, safety and cost. Then if we get chance, I'll give some examples of what I think are good modern developments, again put forward for debate. They often include the restoration, at least in part, of ruins structures. Most of the photographs are mine. I have raided Google Earth and Street View. I've also raided in a couple of cases corporate operators' picture archives. Right, as this may well have a number of TfL people who are not familiar with some of the abbreviations we use on the main line. Just to say that you'll see the letters TSI appearing. That's Technical Specification for Interoperability as used in Europe and before Brexit as used in this country. NTSN, National Technical Specification Notice, that's the Great Britain version of the TSI, and currently for this purpose they mirror the TSI. And then you'll see PRM, which is one of the specifications which covers accessibility for persons of reduced mobility. So both Europe and Britain have PRM technical specification for interoperability. The US has Americans with Disabilities Act, and this prohibits discrimination and ensures equal opportunity and access for persons with disabilities, supported by rules most recently revised in 2011, but currently under review. The review proposals include requiring lifts, ramps, etc. to be train-based and not platform-based. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room would be saying, good, that means it's their problem, not ours. When an intercity or commuter railroad constructs or alters a platform, it must ensure the platform is at least 8 inches above top of rail. While a platform 8 inches above top of rail generally does not provide level boarding, a platform of this height does facilitate boarding by ambulatory passengers, including elderly people who might have difficulty ascending a vertical distance greater than the normal vertical gap between a platform and the first step of a railroad car. In addition to this basic accessibility requirement, a railroad that alters a station platform and does not provide level boarding must ensure that passengers with disabilities can board any accessible car of a train available to the passengers at that station using means including car-borne lifts, station-based lifts, or mini-high platforms. Lifts must have a minimum design load of 600 pounds and accommodate a wheelchair measuring 30 inches by 40 inches. This is similar to the TSI and the NTSN. There is a defined wheelchair. They're not quite the same, but level boarding includes use of a bridge plate between platform or lift and train. So it's not quite the same as level boarding here, in that you can have a plate involved to do the level boarding part of it. Projects are regularly reported as spending millions to meet the height requirement and to permit lift development. And what we're talking about for a lift is this. And what I've seen is not just wheelchair users using this, but people, the door is set up that there are no steps there. The steps are hidden behind, works, yes. Working. The steps are behind. The steps are behind that. That drops down, and normally the steps come down to here and you go up the steps. But what you can do is put a mobile but not very mobile elderly person in the lift and wind the lift up, and then they shuffle into the train, or vice versa. So that's what we mean by a wheelchair lift. It's not just a wheelchair lift, it's a platform. You'll see symbols as we go through the presentation. Amtrak, which is the US National Passenger Railroad, mostly operates using trackage rights over freight and commuter railroads. It does own track, and other operators have rights over that track. Stations may be owned by Amtrak, commuter railroads, cities, you name it. There's two little icons that I'll be using through the slides. The black one shows that the station is regarded as having no barriers. The white one is where there are some facilities not acceptable, not accessible. And if there's no logo, then it's probably not an accessible station in any real way. So initially, I started off with accessibility, but for various reasons, I felt it would be worth getting this operational issue out of the way to start with. So this is Maricopa in Arizona. The platform is the white patch by the hut you can see there. It's accessible. It's got accessible restrooms, accessible waiting room, no high platform, but the wheelchair lift is available. 35 meters long. That's taken at the next station at the train that stops at Maricopa. 9 coaches, 230 meters, 6 distinct areas. So the question obviously was, how does it work? The answer is it gives the conductor something to do, because he knows on the train who is alighting at Maricopa, and because of the booking system, he knows who to expect. So if he's got people who have checked baggage going to Houston or New Orleans, he has to stop the front baggage car there. Then he has to call it forward so that they can board either the sleeper or the coaches that they are going to be travelling in. And if he's got people who are going to Dallas and on to Chicago, anywhere on that route, he then calls it forward again to allow the baggage to be loaded and the people to get into either the coach or the sleeper. So that's basically how you have a 30-odd metre platform and a 230 metre train. So what do we think about that? Good, bad, indifferent? How would it be dealt with here? Would we allow it?
We just give a taxi to the next station here, which happens in many places.
It's actually quite an important station, but you wouldn't think so. It's actually the nearest station to Phoenix and is marketed as the railhead for Phoenix, which is the major state capital, the major city in Arizona. So although there ain't much of it, it's actually got, and that's why, even though it's not much of a platform, it's got all the facilities, because it's not a wayside halt. It's actually a major station in that respect. The other thing that's happened there, and you could see from the previous slide, is somebody's realised that having a level crossing there wasn't the best of ideas, which is why the bridge is being built, because you can imagine how long the train can be stood there whilst it's shuffled past. In the worst case, you could actually finish up with 5 shuffles, one for the front baggage car and so on. Yep. Keep going. Yeah. So Jonathan, you started.
How many trains a day is it? Is it just a once a day occurrence, or is it once a week? Or
it's 3 times a week in each direction. So at the moment, it's not very frequent. Amtrak is trying to come up with the finances to persuade Union Pacific to let it run a daily service, because it would like to run it a daily service. It's one of the only 2 Amtrak routes that's not daily or better. So that's the saving grace of this one. But the only reason for choosing this one in particular is I've got the photograph of the train at Tucson, which made it easy to use Maricopa as the worked example, as it were. So it's not the only place where this happens. This happens a lot. But as a worked example, this one works best. So don't think it's unique. It happens lots of other places where the train stops, it then shuffles, it stops again. Sure.
I expect the distances between adjacent stations can be quite large in that scenario. So
It can.
yeah,
But the thing is that, as I say, Maricopa is the station for Phoenix.
Yeah.
The next station is Tucson, which is an important place in its own right. It's where the major university in Arizona is, that sort of thing. In comparative terms, they're not that far apart, but further apart, you're talking multiple tens of miles. It's a fair way. So, yeah, the previous station to Maricopa is a long way back. So it's the only station a long way.
so I think also, sorry, Wendy, just given the distances overall, then there is value in sorting the passengers. But
Yeah, I mean, people are told, wait until I call you, because one of the things the conductors do is, first of all, it's easy in the sleeper. They know exactly where people are going. But in the coaches, they've actually put tags in to mark where they are telling people, they know where people are going to, so they can then get the people off at the right station. But I'm sorry, I thought you were just waving scratching your ear, right? Okay, I thought, yeah. Sorry, Mike, again.
Yeah, so John, I think you posed the question, would this work in the UK? So I'm going to run my flag up the mast and say not a hope in hell.
Well, it used to.
Hang on, used to, might be, but not nowadays. I can't see how that would ever work in the UK. Our railway is too intensively used.
So what do you do if you have a train longer than a platform?
Get people to shuffle down the train to the accessible door. The Harrington hump comes to mind.
Yes.
On the ground at the moment.
What do you should say? So Thameslink train, 240 metres. The shortest platforms I found that they do DOO at is actually Faygate, which has 100-metre platforms. So you've got a 240-metre train stopping at a 100-metre platform. Again, more for photographic convenience than anything else, because it was easy for me to nip out and take a photograph of it. Norwood Junction, which isn't a particularly village station, it's slightly busier than that, to put it mildly. The train there, as you can see, has open doors because it's stopping at the station as it's supposed to, and the back two coaches are off the platform. And that I see regularly if I'm on a Thameslink that's stopping at Norwood Junction, catches people out, and there is a delay while all the people who've jumped into the last coach at places like Blackfriars and City Thameslink suddenly realise that the doors in coach 12 are not going to open and that people are alighting from coach 10. In the morning, it has an effect the other way, because all the regulars know that the back of the train is going to be empty. So they all congregate at the country end of the upfast platform, which is actually even shorter. You've got the best part of 3 coaches out of that. So there is a huge crowd of people all waiting to get on the last door that's open in the platform, because they know there's a lot more space back there. So given what we were saying about the effects on capacity, we build in a capacity issue by doing it this way.
Yeah, perhaps I should have clarified. But the bit that as I feel wouldn't work here is the shunt moves. Yes, we've got short platforms dotted around. You hear announcements in the train, don't you? The last doors of this station won't open, the doors of this carriage won't open at the next station.
Well, of course,
Hear that, but shunting a train up and down, no.
well, it happens, of course, on the Circle line.
Some trains around on the circle.
No, but the doors, what I was meaning by short platforms.
Oh yeah.
The underground has quite a lot of places for short platforms. Northern Line's got short platforms. Circle Line's got short platforms. So It's interesting because, of course, the regulars know it, but in instances, think how many people are caught out. The thing is, though, that this business of short platforms for trains isn't exactly. That's just Sussex. I haven't listed the ones that are 8 coaches or longer, but are not long enough for the 12 coach trains that run in the peak. So this is a big one. And the question is balancing the commuting regulars who know what's going on and the non-regulars and the time delay with that happening against moving the train forward. I mean, the other thing to think about is you have there trains with portioned working stopping at short platforms. So it's no different to the train we were looking at in the States, which is a portioned train. The trains stopping down the Mid-Sussex line have got a front bit for Chichester and Boyd Beyond and a back bit for Bognor. It's getting people into the right portion in that case. Anyway, that's
But we put the onus on the passenger, don't we, to get it right with some hopeful.
I think that's a key point. We're putting the onus on the passenger to understand the message, to move down the train. Interestingly, the Sussex conductors on Southern regard this as a major part of their job. That both because A, there's portioned working even when the platforms are long enough, and B, the short platforms, they regard their job on the Sussex services down to trains that split at Hayward Heath, trains that split at Horsham. A major part of their job, particularly when they're picking up at Gatwick, which might be people who are unfamiliar, is shuttling people up and down the train. So, it is an issue of getting people. And I suppose because we've got unit trains now, I mean, when HSTs were still used on the Cotswold line, the conductor had a key that he would use to open the doors, and he would position himself along the train, and he had 3 choices: all the doors, me forward, me back. So depending on where the train stopped to allow for things like level crossings, he could then operate, or she could operate the doors that way, or all of them, depending on whether the front end hung over or the back end hung over. So, everybody's got a way of doing it. It's just that the typical Amtrak way is probably not one that we now see. I can't think now of anywhere that does that. Okay.
Question for Stephen online says it's a potential thing. Because ScotRail obviously got their 153 bike car.
Yes.
Does that suddenly?
Yes, that
something similar coming into the problem there.
Because of course you can't. The whole reason for having the bike coach is that it's somewhere where lots of people can put lots of bikes. And therefore, you would have to think about how you stop the train in the platform. It might even be easier to make sure the 153 was stopped in the platform. I'm assuming the corridor connections working, and have people, because there's some very small stations up there, they were given permission many years ago by the inspectorate to have sort of 1 coach stations at places like Muir of Ord and things like that. So you may well find that that's one of the things that has had to be adopted up there, because you've got to be able to get the people off and the bikes off, but you may have to call people back into the forward into the 153 to make them do it.
That's interesting. You said, notice with all our modern trains now, we've very much said there is a sort of zone for the accessible persons piece. It's noticeable on the Elizabeth line that if anyone comes on in a wheelchair, they're going on and right in the middle, centre door.
Yeah,
every time.
A little note about the Elizabeth line, one of the issues with it later on, even in one of the comparators. So, okay, so.
John, sorry to interrupt. So you're talking about platform weight versus training. Are you going to come on about platform height versus training weight? Got a question, I'll say.
Accessibility. Right, let's start. So another picture. I could have actually used the Tucson picture here, but this was already on the stock, so I use this one anyway. So Minute is a classic long distance station. It does not meet the 8-inch height above rail requirement because it's quite a low thing. So you will see at the doors there's a little stool, and almost every long distance Amtrak train, well, certainly everyone I've been on, has one of those little stools just inside the door so that it's put down so you can get to the front of the first step because the platform's low. This is why the requirement for new platforms or rebuilt platforms is the 8-inch height, because 8-inch allows you to step straight onto the bottom step. But otherwise, you see, this is regarded as a not completely accessible station because you can do most things and you would do it by wheelchair lift. The ticket office isn't accessible. Go on.
Yeah, so, sorry, John, to interrupt you mid-flow again. So just to aid my understanding, because I've never been on a train in America, if you were stepping from the platform onto the train,
Yeah,
once you get into the door,
yeah.
so you've just literally gone through the door, you're just inside the train. Are there more steps inside the door?
Well, there has to be to get upstairs.
Well, yeah,
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 yeah.
but-
There will be 2 or 3 steps to get into the train.
yeah, but so
it's not just one step
you
onto
can't-
them.
So there's not a level.
No, some of them are.
But at the lower level.
Yeah, some of them
still
are.
more steps to
Some of them
negotiate.
are, but even those tend to have steps to go into the saloons and that sort. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. So this is another way of doing it. That's a high platform,
Rutland.
with the boarding plates are getting from the platform onto the train sort of stacked up at the back of it. And then there's just a lower section of platform. So
How would you get to that platform? Assuming there's a path behind it.
speak up.
Sorry, how would you get to that platform? I'm assuming there's a path behind it.
Yeah, you go through, well, to get to that platform, you go through the building.
Okay.
The building was shut when I was there, so I don't know how you get from the entrance to that, but there is a station there. As you can see, it's got accessible restrooms, accessible waiting room and everything. So inside there, there's going to be ways of moving around within the station building. So you can use both the level area and the raised area. So seen 2 ways of doing things: the step, and a raised piece of platform.
Sorry, John, is that typically what car length?
It is.
Platform?
It is, because again, the conductor will know where he's got people on board who need to be got off.
They've got 2 doors effectively to get in.
Yeah, again, if needs be, he'll shuffle the train if he's got people in more than one coach. So, do we think either of these works here?
No.
Wrong. Station on the left is Scots Calder, which is on the far north line. And I actually have used Scots Calder because for a while my sister worked at Dolan. And Scots Calder avoided her driving me into Thurso to catch the train in Thurso. So when I was looking for an example of a British station with a god-awful step, I knew about Scots Calder, so I was interested to see what National Rail Inquiry's website, the days when it put fixtures on, had. And to my delight, they actually had. What used to happen is they would open, in the days when I was using it, it was loco haul trains with a brake van. and you boarded at the brake van where there was an extra step. That's how you used to do it. Modern, with using the rail cars, you have the steps there. So obviously what happens, the train arrives, the conductor moves the step to the door is telling everybody to alight from, and then it remains there until the next train comes. So go on, I'm not going.
Go on, Mike, you
No,
go, you go.
no, you're hosting us. You get a privilege of going
So
first.
I suppose the question I want to ask is, in the American or US photos you showed us, are those considered compliant platforms?
No.
So those are workarounds.
Yes, that's a workaround.
So they're workarounds. So I suppose following on from that,
This is a workaround.
this is a workaround. So these aren't compliant platforms. So I think what
No,
we're,
no,
we're comparing is up to non-compliant.
that's right. But it's a
Okay,
way,
non-compliant.
it's, let's put it this way. People immediately react to the American steps and say that's ridiculous. So that's a great photograph to say, well,
It happens here.
it happens here.
Okay, that's fine. Go, Mike. Sorry.
Sorry, let's see.
I think it's also potentially a question of quantity of people using the service.
Sorry, can you speak up?
Question of quantity of people using that service. You know, if you have a commuter train coming into
Yeah,
London,
no, I mean,
is that number of people getting on and off of the steps?
this one is minimal from my experience. You know, there's only about 4 trains a day each way, and this is not exactly the busiest station on the route. So it's the same point that, you know, stations like Minute, there's people get off to have a cigarette break mostly. That's, you know, it's a servicing point, a train queue point, which is why the train stops there long enough to allow people. The one on the right, the name has already been mentioned. It's Harrington. It's the original Harrington hump with the raised hump. And these, of course, now are all over the place, including on London Underground. There are Harrington humps. The only difference is that we tend in this country to treat them as part of the platform rather than as a separate hump. But the principle is the same. You have. Go on, Mike.
So Don, the step, right? So you said, would it work here? And I said no, and you said, well, yes, it does work here. Well, I don't think it works.
No,
It exists.
it exists. Yes, well, that's
But it doesn't
well,
work.
bearing in mind what I've said about what the ADA requires, which is the platform 8 inches above the top of rail. And we'll see an example of that later on and how that works. Because that's the key thing. When you're 8 inches above the top of rail, you walk straight into a low level door. That's why it's,
With a low level floor beyond it.
well, you step into it, but you step in because the coach has steps to get to the level. Some of the commuter coaches that are double deck, you step in and get to the level floor. But in some cases, so if you go back to the picture of the lift, there would be 2 or 3 steps to get up to the level that the person in the lift is being put in, and then it's level throughout.
So my days of steering baby buggies are long gone. Okay, but I mean that's not negotiable with a baby buggy.
Yeah.
With
Well, bearing in
great
mind that
difficulty.
we're looking at, you know, that's why the alternative is the platform lift. That isn't just a wheelchair lift. It's, and say I have watched them using that lift simply for somebody who would have trouble negotiating the stairs. You know, that's, and the bloke who was doing it was cheerily doing for the chap, you know, no problems. Up you go, in you go.
And presumably that they do it for someone who's got some large luggage with them as well, do they?
I've never seen it done for that, but I don't see any reason why.
So you could haul a heavy suitcase up onto one of those trains. I certainly couldn't.
Well, I take
Not the
mine
way we pack.
because I've normally got a bedroom upstairs. I'm normally taking it up the spiral staircase as well, rather than having it because I tend to put it on the top bunk. I know.
So just on that, I suppose the thing for me is that we talk about platform lifts as if they're a common thing. I'm sure in this country, and I'm
That
happy to be told differently.
in
that
this country
it
are,
would be acceptable because the dwell times.
Ah,
What
well, that's a different question.
it is a different question, but the point being that
Because
it's something that we haven't seen because of the circumstances around
Well,
the use.
point is, you see, that it's actually covered in
The NTS.
in the PR. It's gone the wrong way. It's covered in the PRM NTSN.
Yeah.
Not only is it covered, it's actually an interoperability constituent in the same way as displays and ramps are. So the framework is there to allow it to be used.
Yeah.
Yeah, the include, you know, and I've specifically said it's the NTSN, it's actually the TSI as well.
Yeah.
But there is nothing legally that stops a platform lift that lifts you up and puts you in to be used in this country. You would simply get it from somebody who supplies it more widely, has the declaration of conformity that's been assessed by a notified body. Away you go. It's perfectly reasonable thing to do. It's just that people tend not to do it in this country. I can think of your European stations where it'd be a distinct advantage. You know, there's a lot of European stations that are that way. Sean?
So, two questions. First of all, with the step on the left, yeah, the trees that stand as the route is that deemed an accessible level access
No.
scenario? Because the obvious thing is someone mixes.
Yeah, no, I cannot imagine that Scott's Calder is listed as an accessible station.
But the one in the right is
The aim is to try to make, though, that's why it's done, is to have at least the place where you've got level boarding to the trains.
it's a more permanent solution.
Well, yes, because nobody's likely, it's not likely to fall under a train and get.
For the example on the right, on that route, are there designated accessible coaches that
Yes.
the person has to meet?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's look at a different type of issue, a more operational one again for the moment. This is West Glacier in a Glacier National Park. The issue here is how many platforms have it got? Got one. It's on a single track route, but it's a crossing place. So, and then the third track's actually, you can see some engineering stuff at far end, but basically it's a crossing loop, but there's only one platform. That has advantages because you're not having A, to build a second platform, and B, find out how you're going to get people to the second platform. So from an infrastructure point of view, this has got a lot going for it. So would we countenance a single platform like this?
We would, but we'd manage the scheduling the trains through it.
Now, that's an important point because at West Glacier, there's actually only one train a day. And if you're lucky, they are actually as scheduled 12 hours apart. So all that has to happen is the dispatcher has to remember that if he's crossing trains here, that the passenger train goes on the platform side and not on the other side. That it doesn't matter when he's crossing the shale oil or the container trains, they can go whichever one's convenient to him as the dispatcher. He just has to get it right. So yeah, it's not a particular big issue, but it does start to raise a question about how you manage it. Now, this is an easy one because it's only one train a day each way and you're really unlucky. If the worst came to the worst, given the conductors have to back trains up at various places, at terminal stations, at places like Denver on the California Zephyr, where it's an intermediate terminal station. If the worst comes to the worst and you've finished up having the two passenger trains here, The one that's in the outside would sit there until it could pull forward and then set back. So it's manageable. This is a station that's got no claim to be accessible at all. It's got no logo, got no high platform, no wheelchair lift. Basically, it's just a tarred strip. It is long enough for the train. Jonathan.
Just on that note, I mean, you say they saved on building the second platform. I mean, they didn't bust a gut on the first platform.
It's actually fairly busy because the name gives it away. It's one of the two stations that serves Glacier National Park. And Glacier National Park and the lodges were actually created by the railroad, by the Great Northern Railroad. And so, you know, this is all part of it. And there's a fair number of people do use these stations for, I mean, that's why I was there. I'd just been around Glacier National Park, which is how I came to be kicking my heels on the station. So, yeah.
But in terms of infrastructure, it's just a path, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a tired strip. Interestingly, they were looking at doing something of it because the three people you see in orange jackets there are actually from three major consultancies who are on an Amtrak framework, who were there to do a survey of the platform for doing works on it. Because I asked them, they weren't very communicative, but and I could see who they were by the names on the back of the, but it was sort of Jacobs and a couple of other ones like Jacobs, you know, there. So I thought, well, you know, it's a bit better than some of the places I did. Over the years ago, you know, having a trip to Glacier National Park to do platform service is a bit better than you know you know, sort of doing a bridge reconstruction at Acton Central and wondering how you're going to get the train in and things like that. Anyway, moving on. Same thing, but at a somewhat different station. We're now in Syracuse in upstate New York. So here you've got all singing, all dancing. You've got a high platform, you've got fully accessible everything. But again, there's only one platform and it's on a loop. So you've got a westbound track, an eastbound track and a loop. So, okay, for an eastbound train, it simply goes into the loop, does its business, and then, assuming the path's available, come back out. If you've got a westbound train, though, it's got to cut across into the platform, the eastbound into the platform loop, and then when it's finished, cut across back out again. So this is a rather different situation. It's a much busier station because Syracuse is a major university city. It's got more trains. It's something like half a dozen trains a day each way. So the only saving grace here is you can see from the gantry, all the tracks are reversible. So if the worst comes to the worst and you had to, you could send a westbound train along the eastbound, perhaps to overtake a freight and then cross over, rather than having to wait there and carve around. So does this create an issue? Again, you can see that there's a lot of money being spent on this station, but they've saved the cost of doing something on the far side. What do we think about this one?
Again, it's down to the operational issues, isn't it? You know, half a dozen trains a day, provided you haven't got too much perturbation on any given day, it all sounds manageable to me. So. Well,
the last two stations I can think of in this country that had single platforms, one was Cambridge, which now has a widened platform, and the other was on the Cambrian at Cassous, which was a single platform station with a crossing loop. And until the radio electronic tokenless block was installed, there was a signal box there. And because there weren't that many loops, you did finish up having to cross passenger trains. And then they finished up doing exactly the same as you'd have to do at West Glacier, shunt the trains. Now, when RETB came along additional loops were put in up on the summit. Can't remember the name. Tel Aviv, up at Tel Aviv, additional loop facilities and things like that were put in. It was decided that Casus was close enough to Newtown, the next station, it was only 5 or 6 miles away. They would live without the loop at Casus. And because of trouble, you see, with RETB, which is a fairly simple signalling system, the prospect of having to shunt a train to put it back in the platform was, when you've got spring points and things like that, begged a few questions, which is why it was abolished. So it's well within my railway memory, because I actually worked in my sandwich course. I was working on the Cambrian coast, and so travelling through Casus was something I did, and it was late 80s when that was abolished. And Cambridge had a single platform, and where else? Gloucester had a single platform for a while. Yeah, I don't.
Falmouth branch has the thing where the trains basically come at each other and there's a junction halfway along the platform.
Yeah, there's 1 or 2 relics still around, but it's not unique. So the answer is yes, it's manageable. And of course, you're saving yourself an awful lot of money on bridges, lifts, other platforms, and everything. So, I mean, we've got a situation at the moment in the Cardiff Valleys, where there's a station called Inniswen, the last station before Treherbert, is currently closed because it has a single platform. The line is now double track. And there is going to be a period whilst the design's finished and the platform works are done. I know because I'm the ASBO and APBO for it, as I was for Treherbert and Dinas. So, but yeah, it's an interesting question as to, given there's never going to be more than a 15-minute service, whether they really needed the double track all the way, given they've had to put an extra platform in at Treherbert as the terminus as well. They could have done that easily just with a single track up to it. So yeah, I'm thinking about Dinas Rhondda, which required a new platform, new bridge, lifts for not that many, in comparative terms, for that line, one of the very quietest stations. I mean, Inniswen is very, very quiet, which is why the works there are following on. But yeah, it's a question to think about whether you would need an extra platform. Whether the signalling could cope with a single line section. I mean, bear in mind the Wimbledon branch runs a 5-minute service with single line branch on Croydon tram, runs a single line sections with a 5-minute service in each direction. So it's work, you can do things. Right, so also using Syracuse, this is level 40, American style. You can see the boarding plate is there, just past the lady there. So you see that's the boarding plate in use. Because the trouble is that the platforms are really set up for, you've got to allow the double stack containers. In fact, Syracuse, just beyond Syracuse, is where there's a major transshipment between double stack and single stack. Some of the things to think about. We mentioned Elizabeth Line earlier. The Elizabeth Line requires the use of ramps at all stations between Acton Main Line and Reading. And passengers on the Elizabeth Line are told when they leave Tottenham Court Road that if you have not already made arrangements for a ramp and you're going anywhere between Acton Main Line and Reading, if you've not made arrangements, please alight at Bond Street, where arrangements will be made for you when you get to your station.
This is for level access. This is for level access requirements, accessibility specifically.
Yeah, because that's how those stations become accessible, is by ramp. But if you haven't booked it, because the rest of the Elizabeth Line is, of course, you travel. Anybody who is a PRM can travel that way, because it's designed that way. But the works have not been done between Acton Main Line and Reading, and you are every morning when I go that way to work, I hear the announcements about getting off and telling the staff to arrange around. Other thing to note here, because it's a convenient time to note it, although it's a bit hit and miss here, is the broad yellow tactile strip at the platform edge, which is a standard feature of the modernised stations. So Maricopa had it, although it wasn't very visible. Rutland had it, but Tucson, Minot and West Glacier don't have it because they're the old-fashioned ones. They've got a yellow line if you look it. But this is a standard feature. Rather than doing what tends to happen in this country, where you have a platform edge marking and then a danger area tactile marking, in the US, usually the two, you have this big broad yellow tactile strip that marks the edge and basically keep back from. So it's just a useful moment to mention that. Right. One of the other provisions that's in the European and British legislation is the concept of an obstacle-free route, so that somebody arriving at the station can get to facilities, including the opposite platform, without a problem. Now, the obstacle-free route isn't a level route. There are steps that are suitable for certain people, and if the steps are the only can't be the only route, if there are steps, you've got to have ramps or lifts or both or whatever. But there must be a route somebody can use that is free of obstacles, so they can get to waiting areas, ticketing facilities, to get from the car park to the trains, and get from the trains back to the car park. So in other words, you've got to be off to bus stops or wherever. But there is a list of things that count. Catering facilities, incidentally, don't count, but information points, ticketing, waiting areas defined. A hut on a platform that's just a shelter isn't defined. So you don't. Only if the waiting area has certain aspects does the obstacle-free route have to get to it. Otherwise, you only have to get to the platform. So, Elko in Nevada, which is on the Union Pacific's main line to the Bay Area of San Francisco from central United States. It's not quite the original railroad that was built for the original transcontinental, which actually ran through the middle of Elko. This is on a line that just runs around, skirts the built-up area. There's quite a lot of that being done to get rid of 56 level crossings in 400 yards sort of thing, because it's really... Anyway, this is the westbound platform, which is on the north side. It's allegedly fully accessible. There's not much to it. You can see it's a hut on a platform with a ramp, accessible parking. There's supposedly a wheelchair lift available, but God knows where it is. They presume it's chained to something somewhere. So that's the westbound platform.
What's the ramp steepness in America allowed to be?
Yeah, well, no, because it's got a level section in the middle of it. You see, it's just
Yeah, but even then,
it's fairly
1 in 12. Is it 1 in 12?
Yeah,
in the UK, if we did that,
you can see why it's got a level section in the middle. It's otherwise it would be a bit of a.
I think that's pushing the limits of
Yeah.
what we. I don't think I get away with designing that in the UK.
Yeah, it's getting close to it. I've not actually looked at things like ramp gradients. Thank you. That's something to think about.
12 if you've got intermediates, and about 1 in 20 if you haven't.
Yes, but that's got an intermediate. So, but it
still looks more than 1 in 12.
Yeah, mind you, look at the ramp at East Croydon.
Yes, but that's not necessary. That's probably built before.
Yeah, the bottom. Right, so that's the westbound platform. There's the eastbound platform, which is basically similar. Now, Elko is charitably described as basically in the middle of nowhere. It's actually got a population of 50,000. So, but it's quite foreseeable that people might want to park here, get the train to Reno in Nevada, which is a major city for that part of the world, and get the train back. So you get the westbound train to Reno, and you get the eastbound train back. So the interesting question is, how do you get between the platforms?
Is there something like a barrow crossing, John?
No,
Underpass.
no.
Is that bridge in the distance? That is it, is it?
Look at the Amtrak notice. At one stage, what this replaced was an arrangement with taxis. But because otherwise, the level route, well, in fact, the only route between the two platforms is to come down here, go over there, round there, down there, and along there. So if you leave your car on one side, catch the train, you've got an interesting exercise the other side, which is why Amtrak's got this arrangement to get. So somebody earlier talked about in this country we'd lay on road transport to move people about. Here's a case where there's road transport to get people between the two sides. In fact, I am aware of situations where that's been done, where there has been no access between the two platforms for various reasons, e.g. where the station, what's the station station on the shops line out of Edinburgh. I did the ASBO for the change in level crossing there. And one of the issues was because the level crossing was the way between the two platforms, what happened when the road over the level crossing was closed, and they were actually running a shuttle bus around between the two sides of the station, which was also being used by pedestrians who needed to get across.
So John, in that scenario then, would it not be better to just have the one platform?
This is a much busier, it's a main trunk route.
Okay, right. So the service doesn't allow it.
No.
No.
I mean, one of the things I've always mused on is what happens if you're stood on the eastbound platform and the dispatcher puts the eastbound train on the westbound track. But again, the conductor would know that. What they would do, I do not know. The other problem is that the trains here, the passenger trains here, one is late at night and the other is early in the morning. So, you know, you've got 2 mile long freight trains hammering through here in the night. You're difficult. However, boarded crossings. So this is, we're zooming around. This is Santa Barbara in California. Rather nice Spanish Revival station. No high platform, but it's got all the markings up the way. This is the street side. The bus there is actually one of Amtrak's throughway buses that helps link further north. That's the platforms. And this one does have the 8-inch raised platform. And you can just about see how it's level with the train, the departing train, to the rear of the photograph. So, you know, you've got the 8-inch platform, relative height as against the train door, just about. If you look down there, you can see that at least you're stepping into it. So you're stepping in and then and up. It's got the lifts and everything if need be to get people in. The infrastructure TSI actually in Europe permits platforms for new work as low as 200 millimeters, depending on the country. So in Slovakia, the minimum is 200 mil. In Poland, it's 220 mil. So in Europe, they're not saying anything too radically different from this. And you can also see that the train is leaving from the further track and you have a crossing to get to it. And the PRN and of course the TSI, they permit the use of level track crossings in stations. So this is in line with what is permitted in British and European legislation in the TSIs for an NTSM to PRN.
So Is that a specific case for Slovakia and Poland?
It is. It's their particular features. They're the worst two, but there are particular features that are not a great deal better in different European countries. The reason for picking those two is they're close to the 8 inches, but there's others. Greece has got some. And anybody who's travelled in Europe will know you get platforms of these sorts of heights. You know, it's including off the LGV where TGV stop.
But I suppose the difference being, in my experience in mainland Europe, has been where accessibility is concerned. Level access as defined in the
Yes, level access is defined differently. Level access is unassisted boarding. That's the key difference. Whereas,
and that's quite. I'm not sure how it's defined in the US.
Well, it's defined as being able to be boarded. Well, as you've seen at Syracuse, is level boarding with the aid of a ramp. Partly that's because of the distance that for structure gauge regions, the distance of the vehicle. So even if the platform and the train are dead level,
Yeah,
your problem isn't the height, it's your gap. The bridging plate is for the gap.
but that's not unassisted lifting, is it? Because you would need, is that bridging plate, if I understood it, is that something that's come from the train, or is that somebody laying it?
No, the plate lives on the station.
Understood, so that's someone, a
because
manual intervention.
yeah, yes, it does.
Okay,
And so even trains like this, which is a regional service running down to Los Angeles, will have conductors on it.
so the wheelchair sign in for example, UK
Yeah.
means
You do it on your own.
unassisted. You can
Yes.
That is not the
No,
same.
no, it does
Okay,
not
so
mean
that-
unassisted.
It means that this facility is available.
Yes, you can be got on the train.
Okay,
So one thing here is when I turn through 90 degrees, and the point is that that is not, if you like, an informal route across the little park. It's actually a formal route because it's actually got nice stone edging to the path, and there's a ramp. You have to go round the back of that to use the little ramp. So, I mean, this is all the official way of moving across, and people wander from that side across as they see fit.
and is that done of your own accord? There are no traffic lights or
No.
anything? No, it's just
No.
look either way, like you're crossing a road.
Yeah,
Okay,
just like that one.
So John, what's the likely speed of the approaching trains?
All the passenger trains stop. And being America, they will normally come in very slowly, going ding, 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 and sounding horn. That's a standard approach. They crawl into the stations. Going back to this one, I don't recall seeing much in the way of freight. However, further north, the passenger service stops, apart from the long distance train, the passenger service on this route stops at San Luis Obispo, and California Polytechnic is there. And a friend of mine went to California Polytechnic, and she spent 3 years in accommodation backing onto the railway. And she is very definite that there are a lot of freight trains, but the difference is that because the route with those trains, there's not that many trains from Santa Barbara to LA, but when you get further in, you then get the LA commuter trains run by the regional authority. It becomes much, much busier. So I suspect that the freights run at night to keep them out of the way of the passenger trains, particularly as further into LA. The track authority is actually the metro system, not Amtrak and not the freight company. This here, it's the freight company. Amtrak doesn't have track in this part of the world. Further in, it's the freight company. So in the answer to that question is freights run, but they would appear to run at times when the passenger trains are not running. So the issues for passengers isn't that great. people wandering back across the track on the way from a drunken night out, it's a different problem, of course. But that's no different to that one. I mean, this is actually, I mean, the train company itself gave me this one. There is a helpful telephone there if you bother to use it. There are, but then the visibility is a lot worse here than it is at Santa Barbara, you know, where, and also one suspects that the train will be coming into the station rather faster than walking pace, which is the normal procedure at those American stations. Say they come in, sounds, horns sounding, bells ringing, you know, it's not the same way as that will be running in.
An observation per se would be, culturally speaking, would it be fair to say we have different ways of managing safety in terms of who's responsible personally and corporate compared to the US?
The
different.
Well, yes, I mean the Federal Railroad Administration would take action if its rules were breached, bearing in mind that unlike in this country, the FRA actually has its own track testing card and it mandates particular track geometry things, and it will run testing cars to check that people are maintaining the track to the track geometry, and it will fine operators if they don't meet its requirements. So, you know, there are legal measures in place, but here, apart from the signs telling you not to trespass and all the rest of it, you're basically left to your own devices. I mean, what have we got? Stop, look, listen. Danger, staff only, no trespassing. So no trespassing is a legal requirement, staff only supporting that. And then, you know, the sign saying danger, then there's a little white plate which has probably got some of the legal provisions about trespassing on it.
Survivors will be prosecuted. Survivors will be prosecuted.
Well, yeah, but the point is, you see, and also, as I've noted there, previously I said about the TSI permitting level crossing, you know, boarding level crossings at stations. The PRM one does as well. You know, I mean, if you design something that has this, obviously from the safety side, if you were doing it for a new station, there'd be a lot of questions asked about how you do manage the people. But technically, from an accessibility point of view, I mean, I don't know whether people would know in the Netherlands, something like that, they'd actually have little barriers. And the barriers. Keep going. No, the whole point about this is like. So can you speak up so we can make sure it's heard by?
They're starting to crack down. Starting to enforce to make sure there's at least cross railway crossing notification.
Yeah.
Which is equivalent of a yield. So.
Because I suppose my terrible observation is that in mainland Europe, I do know it's, so we look at this and we're aghast, thinking it's unsafe, and it is unsafe considering the speeds and frequency. But I do know in mainland Europe, where it's less frequent but equally fast, it's not uncommon and to be able to walk across, and it's a shortcut that people do.
Yeah.
It's a cultural thing.
Yeah, this is the whole reason for getting people to think about these examples. You know, the initial reaction is usually, oh, but then you say, well, wait a minute, sure.
It's going to specific, and historically it has a lot of level crossings, barrow crossings. It's the natural geography.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes.
Yeah, which is why it wasn't difficult to find an example.
Yeah. There are other examples in Anglia as well.
As I say, yeah, I just did a little hunt around to see if I could find one. Right, so
the risk assessment's going to be the one that's going to.
Yeah, the risk assessment.
If you want to do things like run extra trains,
that's running extra trains is a big issue for all sorts of crossings, level crossings as well.
It then puts all the risk up on every crossing.
Well, because like this. Even if it's a fully barriered crossing, running extra trains and therefore a much increased barrier downtime brings its own risks, which is one reason why under West Coast Route Modernisation Upgrade, the crossings at Canley and Tile Hill at the stations there were abolished, because with the prospects of the enhanced Virgin service on top of everything else that was used in the Rugby Birmingham line, the half-hourly local service, the Little Londons, freight trains heading for Bescott, the cross-country services and free Virgin trains an hour, the barriers would not be up very much, and that brings to its own issues. So yes, very much train usage affects it, and it also affects foot crossings. You know, if you're looking to increase speeds, what's the effect on warning times? You know, is relying on look and see enough? Do you need to put a red and green lights in? That sort of thing.
Interesting that you can have it, but
Yeah,
the paperwork and
the additional
risk
things,
assessments,
yeah,
it gets to the point
yeah,
that might
from
be
a
actually
PRM
quickly build the bridge and
from a PRM accessibility point of view, it's possible, you know, but and there may be situations where putting a bridge in or a subway in is simply impossible because of the heritage and everything else, or other things in the way. Then, you know, and then you simply have to do things like barriers and all sorts of things. Locked gate, reload gates with releases. There's ways of doing it. So let's have a look at something else. Right, this is something that's not actually unique to Albuquerque, but is a station that's shared, but the two operators use different parts of the station. So Rail Runner, which is a commuter railway, uses the top end, and that big building there is the main bus terminus for all the local buses, including the airport link and everything within Albuquerque. And then Amtrak uses the other end of the station, which has road access, which allows for servicing the locomotives, bearing in mind they're doing a Chicago to Los Angeles trip. So this is a fueling point for them. And it also allows the little truck and trailer that they use for collecting the checked baggage and that sort of thing. That can all happen down here, out of the way of the commuters. It's not the only station that's like this. Orlando in Florida has a similar arrangement where Sunrail and Amtrak share the station. So Amtrak regard it as having most facilities, but the only thing that it seems not to have is accessible station parking, which is why you get the white icon rather than the black icon. So that's looking at the station. This one you can see has the 8-inch high platforms, and this one does have reasonably level boarding, but there's still a step in it. One curiosity is you have a fence along the back of the platform, because your only business is with the platform on the outer face, and then the other platform on the inside, and you can see the Amtrak station in the distance, which is where they have the baggage trolley running around to collect the checked baggage and bring the Bowsers up to fuel the locomotives and that sort of thing. And we were talking earlier about keeping a unit train together with locomotive at one end. This is a good illustration of a cap car. The train we saw at Santa Barbara had one of these at the far end. This is very, very common in the US. You have a loco at one end. The double-deck coaches, I mean, this one, chatting to the staff, before COVID, the busiest trains on the rail run were carrying 600 passengers. So, you know, it's a fairly hefty operation. That's why you've got 4 double-deck coaches for 600 passengers. Some of the off-peak ones are a lot quieter, but then you'll see some of those. But, you know, that's the operation. And you can see it's got a crossing down there. If we go to the next one, you see it's got a crossing where I'm stood, and that's the other end of a commuter train. And that's looking along the commuter part of the station. You can see the railing there at the back of the platform. So closing up on that, the rail runner does things slightly differently. It says everything's accessible by ramp or mini high level platform. So we're back to something like Rutland, except for the fact that the platform is only mini, because on these double deck trains, the door level's quite low. So in the red circle, You'll see another one shortly, but that's an example here at Albuquerque. And what you would do is the person would get onto that, and then the boarding plate would be used to give them a bridge into the train or out of the train. And that's how it works. That's what accessible by ramp or mini high level platform means. So,
John, just on that, am I correct in assuming trains come from opposite directions? And
but they're always the same way around.
and then they leave in the
Yeah,
opposite side.
Albuquerque is an intermediate station.
So, so the rail runner doesn't go into the Amtrak area.
It goes through it.
It goes through, okay.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
it's just where they get on
Yeah,
and off.
no, yeah.
Okay.
Both
understood.
trains run through the station
Okay,
because the rail runner runs from Santa Fe to Belen through Albuquerque, and Amtrak runs from Chicago to Los Angeles
Okay.
through Albuquerque.
it's just where they stop. in the
It's,
station.
yes, so
Okay,
we're
understood.
looking at stations and the stations, they're on the same track.
Yeah.
But one has one end, one has the other end. It's the same thing at Orlando, where again, the Amtrak end has a lift like we've seen in the pictures that takes people up and down. It has a tug tractor and wagons for carrying baggage to and from the train, that sort of thing, which you
Understood.
want to keep away from the Sunrail commuter people.
Understood.
So, you know, it's one long platform. At Orlando, the depot, the traditional depot is still used by Amtrak. The Sunrail has a bit further north. Here, the original depot is where the rail runner is, where there was originally a House Hotel and whatever. And the Amtrak station as is was originally a parcels depot, but it's been converted to the passenger station. So, from a signaller point of view, they're the same station because there's permissive working to get in, because that's the way railroad works at times. But from a passenger point of view, you can walk between the two stations, like the platform that, as you can see, I've spun around. But operationally, from a passenger point of view, you use one end for the railroad, although you could use both ends. If we look at that one, you see that one's more at the Amtrak end, but it's just where he's happened to stop it. So, I mean, it's they interwork. Incidentally, the track authority here is the rail runner. The rail runner gives access to Amtrak, so they're not happy when Amtrak's late because it's delaying the commuter trains, and the BNSF freight trains have to fit in round rail runners' commuter trains. That's not an unusual situation where you have a commuter system. They take over the track, and then they work with the original freight owners to do that. So, Sean.
Question about culture and
Sorry.
question in regard to culture and behaviour. Would be allowed to allow barriers like that within platforms because we seem to trap people or impede
Yeah,
people?
It's as close as you'd be, because of the way it's arranged. You've got that one and that one. It's quite a difficult space to actually walk along to get yourself trapped. I mean, there's just about, I mean, bearing in mind, it's as much of anything because you can see the shape of the coach. If it was at the edge of the platform, you'd be scraping the side of the coach, so it's in. But yes, I suppose somebody could deliberately try and walk along it. It's too narrow to walk along, really. But as far as I'm aware, there's no obstacles to you walking along. Well, there is something that used to be the principle here, that people were expected to take reasonable care of their own safety.
But here we also protect the refuge under the platform. It's back on this much higher.
Yeah, well, that's right, because it's which is an interesting one, because that's that's a separate requirement that's been introduced as a place. I mean, the big question is whether anybody'd actually think to use it, but that's a different question. It's there in case somebody does think to use it that fallen off the platform. But the thing is, it's only 8,
hasn't talked its way into the logic at all of these platforms.
yeah, but it's only 8 inches high here, unlike Syracuse that's full height. You know, if you fall off this platform, you just get back on it. Right. Carrying on with the rail runner, let's carry on to the far end of the line. Now, people are probably familiar with the concept of Santa Fe being a major US railroad. You know, it had the famous song about it and everything. And even now in BNSF, it's what the SF stands for, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which is a conglomeration of names of all sorts of different freight companies. So it might come as a surprise to learn that that's the depot. Because in fact, because of geography, the main line never actually went to Santa Fe. It went down to Albuquerque because Santa Fe's position is sort of tucked away between the mountains. So Santa Fe had a branch line, so it has in fact a branch line to it from the main line. The rail runner has a new route to Santa Fe that leads directly in. So anyway, that's Santa Fe's depot and that's Santa Fe's platform. Now you see here, you get a much better view of the mini high level platform. The station building is behind those two trees there. So that little building's behind that. So there's your mini high level platform. The train is just stabled there. It's not there for passenger use until it's shunted across into the station. So don't worry about that. But that's basically, you know, you see that the comments there are taken from the Rail Runner website. Do you know why it's called the Rail Runner?
Because there's the road runner firm.
Exactly so. Look at the logo. They are all over the place in that part of the world, which is why, despite the cartoon, it's actually a real thing of the road runners. So calling the railway the Rail Runner was probably one of the easiest marketing decisions. Right, so basically that's Santa Fe. You've got the depot behind those two trees. You've got the mini high level platform. The front of the train, from my experience, stops where I am. You can see the tactiles. The tactiles continue to me because there's actually another exit behind me, which has some interesting features.
So John, that track
Yeah.
is that actually in passenger service?
Well, normally the cab of the train stops where I am.
Good.
Just to add to
You're just hiding the buffer stop, aren't you? It's the other side.
just to add to
An invisible buffer stop.
Yeah.
It's that building.
just to add to the fun, you can see that there is a bus stop, and that's where passengers can congregate for the shuttle to and from the centre of Santa Fe. I mean, it's walkable, it's easy walkable, but so you're actually doing that at somewhere where you may well have people congregating and waiting for the shuttle. That's probably the biggest example of their world is not our world of all of these. So was the lady going to, were you going to, oh right, I thought you were, feel free to, you know, I mean, you've got all these old lags throwing things at me, I mean, but yeah, that's probably the most, their world is not our world of everything, but we've got one or two more coming. So, you know, everything looks fine. It's got a level access out of the station. You've got the shuttle bus there, and you've then got that at the end of the line. All I would say is go back to what the answer the question for Santa Barbara. The train will be coming in very slowly, horn going, bells going, everything. So it's not as if he's like in this country where he'll be arriving at a rate of knots and not putting the brakes on until he gets into the platform.
Did you see obviously very limited in terms of the pictures you've shown, but did you see many kind of buffer stops of that type of?
This one is unusual. Normally there's a bumper.
Okay.
This is exceptional, even for the USA in a situation like this.
Okay.
Normally there's a bumper. This is, well, wait until you'll see another, how are we doing for time? 10 more minutes. Okay, I'll whip through the next examples then. So, right, what comes next? Right. Oh yes. Rocky Mountaineer operates in the USA now as well as in Canada. It runs a twice weekly service, and that's important for one of the things we're going to talk about, from Denver to Moab, with an intermediate overnight stop at Glenwood Springs. You get off, they put you up in a hotel, then you get back on the train. Moab was chosen because it's handy for Arches National Park, Canyons National Park, and for people going further into Utah to Mesa Verde. The place is knee deep in national parks. The route is generally regarded as the most scenic in the USA, and Denver is all right as a place of base. For if anybody knows of Red Rocks Amphitheatre, Denver's where you used to do Red Rocks Amphitheatre from. The big open air rock base. You must have heard of the Red Rocks. Yes, yes. And Denver has other, it's the base for going into the Rocky Mountains and everything. So it's a good place to do it. One problem is that Moab never had a railway, so it never had a depot. In the 1960s, a potash mine opened and a branch was built down from the Denver and Rio Grande to Moab for the potash trains. Then more recently, it's still being used for potash, but it's now being used for nuclear waste as well. The problem is that the closest place to Moab, where everybody's staying before they get on the train, is actually where they put the nuclear waste on the train. So, given this is a premium service, they don't load the people on the train in the nuclear waste facility. They take you 10 miles north of Moab to a place where there is a Y, so you can reverse the train. So the train comes in from Denver, drops the people off, pulls forward, backs round, turns round, and then you get on it. Like that. So, yeah, it's basically beaten earth that you walk across, and then just to make you feel more welcome, either side of the doors that you have to climb up the steps into, it's got the US flag either side of it. So anyway, it does deploy lifts, but it may require wheelchair users to transfer on board to a train a wheelchair that's only 15 inches wide, sort of thing you occasionally see used on planes to get people off. They can allow some wheelchairs on, but the limit's 23 inches, which is not the 30 inches of the ADA. So it is problematic. In Europe and the UK, the TSI and the NTSN apply to vehicles used on the system. ADA applies to intercity or commuter railroads. Now then, occasional use is permitted. It's an interesting argument about twice a week being occasional, given that some of the Amtrak services are only 3 times a week. Is twice a week really occasional? At the moment, they are working like this. They've been doing it since COVID, which is when it started. The other curiosity with this service is it can't currently run into Denver station. It has to do the same sort of exercise in Denver. The track owner, which is Union Pacific's happy. In fact, Union Pacific contracts when the Rocky Mountaineer locos are out of use. Union Pacific has some locos. Union Pacific's happy. They gives them trackage rights all the way from Moab to Denver. The owner of Denver Station, which is the city, is happy. The commuter railroad's happy. Amtrak is worried that if the Rocky Mountaineer used the full length platforms at Denver, it would get in the way of their one train a day each way. There are only 4 full length platforms in the station at Denver. And, and the only one of them is regularly used by the commuter trains, which is the airport service, which can be up to 6 cars. The others tend to use the on echelon platforms. Think Overground at Clapham Junction, think Croydon Tram at Wimbledon, where you have 2 like that. So you've got 4 full length platforms, but Amtrak, it's not got to the Surface Transportation Board yet, but I can see it getting there because it's a nonsense. You have to be taken by coach into Denver and dropped off at the station. So given Mike's given the thing, we're just coming towards the end. I'll do 2 quick ones. The first one is a heritage. That is Silverton in Colorado. You're on one of the 2 main streets, and yes, it does look like a Wild West mining town because that's precisely what it is, except the fact there's not many mines. Right, keep your eyes on that yellow building and imagine you're going along here and then you're turning right into the road that carries on to the right. That's what you find. Again, the Durango and Silverton, they've got an accessible coach with wheelchair lift, and the accessible coach has got toilets and everything. The depot is actually hidden by the train, but that's a road. And given my comment about you know, the absence of a bumper or buffer stop, that one again is interesting. Going this way, the loco's at the front. Going back, the train backs out, goes round a Y, and then the conductor backs it in.
The question on risk here, how many more times have cars ended up on the track?
Well, no,
compared to
because
trains ending up on the road.
well, no, because that's a road. You can drive along it.
So you can drive down the tracks as well.
Well, you've got, look, yeah, if you want to drive on the tracks, you can,
Yeah.
but
But we're obviously looking at the risk of a train going onto the road.
yeah,
There's probably a higher risk of a car going onto the track.
well, no, because cars can drive down there. It's
It's a road.
there's a car. It's a road
Yeah.
with track. It's like a tramway. It's just that it's a train that's a loco that's 86 tons, and a tractive effort that's bigger than a Britannia Pacific. It's about the same tractive effort as a Merchant Navy. It's just that with a long train of coaches behind it. So let's just quickly move on to the one that I think is really good. It's a tram rather than a train. Well, basically, you see, the flag says it all. It's a tram stop. It's a longer distance bus stop, the Rapid Ride. And as you can see from the flag, there's several local buses stop there. Shared ticket machine, shared validator, shared shelter. Everybody uses the platform. In this country, we've got a few cases where trams use the back of the platform that's used by buses, Central in Croydon, Haymarket in Edinburgh. But I am not aware of anything as completely integrated as that one. I'm using a Google picture here because my picture of it taken from the tram is awful. As you can imagine, trying to take the picture of the flag from a streetcar stop there was, because it was only just as it was starting to go, I realised that it was actually completely integrated. You've got one flag, one stop, one raised platform, a bus, streetcar, longer distance bus, you name it. That is an exemplar. And that's probably, because it's the end of this section of the talk, given the time frame we've got, time to stop.
Thank you very much for joining us and giving this. I think you've helped give us some of the comparisons between the UK and things and between key learners. I think it's for us, from that I should take, is that sometimes there's nothing that says you can't do it. And that's probably one of the challenges that you come along and say to sometimes, and definitely actually one of them in some projects as a comparison, so there isn't actually a rule against it. There's nothing that says you can't go for a derogation.
Well, again, one of the things that
People
might
get sometimes
is what
scared
you
of it.
can do under the NTSN.
Yeah.
You know, you can have a platform lift, you can have level boarding, you just have to manage it.
Yeah, and that's I think
That's
what
all-
scares people.
Yes,
And that's sometimes I'm trying to say, it actually depends very much who you're working with, what things, whether they're willing to say, actually, I've had people say, no, we'll go and buy the land, we'll go and do this. So we've got, this is quite a standard delegation to go for. You know, be brave and go for it sometimes.
yeah. I think part of the issue is that going back to the good old days of BR, everything was internal.
Yeah.
You were internalising things. Now, people are often worried about their professional indemnity insurance and things like that. We had that big time when I worked from Interfleet, but when we were bought by S&C Leveling, which is a major multinational construction company, we were told, oh, you don't need to worry about that anymore. Given the size we are, you know, your any claims that come up against you are nothing compared with the claims that come up against us. Yeah, I mean, it literally was, you know, until then, everything was looking over your shoulder. What's the PII going to say? And an awful lot of work is done by smaller consultants who really have a problem. Because if anything goes wrong, the project JV's long ago disappeared and it's them picking up the tab. So that's a problem. When it's internalised within an organisation, it makes managing the risks much easier. But as you've seen, it can be done with multiple track access arrangements with two different operators sharing stations.
Well, so everyone's joining in, so our appreciation is strong for.
Okay.
So we might be retiring to the red line afterwards for a drink.
Well, I'm going, even if no one else is.
So next meeting's on the 8th of May. Okay. Right. Thanks very much.
Hey, what, bring it on?
Thank you very much. Very interesting.